Did you know that 90% of the apps in the App Store haven't been used in the past 30 days? And that's because most people are building products that no one needs and no one is actually using. So for you as an entrepreneur, you really want to avoid that, right? And the way we're going to do that is by targeting problems that people actually have, building solutions they actually need, and really fine-tuning the difference between what we have in our mind as an idea and what people say that they need. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about assumptions, customer discovery, which is the first step of validation for your startup. Let's go. What's up, everyone? Welcome to my startup studio. My name's Christian Peverelli, and I'm the co-founder of We Are No Code. We train non-technical entrepreneurs to build startups with no-code technology and proven methodologies. This is the first time that you join this channel. It's all around non-technical founders and how to build your startup. So like, subscribe, share it with a friend, or whatever you can do. We appreciate it. It helps us grow the channel. It helps us continue to do what we do, and we will continue to bring you amazing tips and tricks for non-technical founders. Now, first of all, I know this is not the sexiest topic. People really like to talk about building products, raising money, and all that stuff, but it's such a fundamental part of building a business. And if you skip this step, I can tell you, having seen thousands of startup entrepreneurs' applications for an accelerator program, that most people are doing this wrong and it's costing them way too much money and time. So let's make sure that's not you. So the first thing to be said about this is that when we have an idea for a startup, we have a huge number of assumptions behind our idea that we may or may not be conscious of, but they make this startup really high risk. And so the entire point of customer validation has to do with reducing the risk of your startup early stage, because at this point, you are literally the only investor in your startup. You're investing time, you're investing money, resources, and so we really want to make sure that you're doing like any professional investor. You are trying to mitigate risk as much as possible, reduce the risk as much as possible so that all that time and money is invested in the right things. Now, if we use the example of Airbnb, one of the high risk assumptions early stage for them was that homeowners are willing to rent their houses out to complete strangers on the internet, right? This is a really high risk assumption, and if it's proven wrong, then Airbnb, the way that we know it, would not exist. Obviously, we know that they proved it right, and it's an awesome service, but this is the kind of assumption that we really want to get crystal clear early on, because it's going to make or break the product and also the company that we're trying to build. Meaning that if we're not able to prove that right, then we're going to have to change up the business model. We're going to have to change up the way that the platform works completely. And it's better to know that early on than later on when we realize, hey, this actually doesn't work. Why? Because people don't want to rent their second home. Now, once we've clarified these assumptions, what we want to do is to put them to the test. And the first test for these assumptions is going to be to do customer discovery, right? A set of interviews that allows us to get insight into the problem and to understand the customer segment that we're going after. So that really just breaks it down into two individual things, right? A problem and a specific individual, a specific market segment. We use these words interchangeably, so I hope that it makes sense. So let's first of all break down both of these. On one side, we have the customer segment, right? Here we're talking about a very specific customer that we're gonna wanna go after because that individual has a very specific problem, right? Now we could be trying to target everyone, but unfortunately, targeting everyone is targeting no one early stage in a startup. And so we really want to get crystal clear on who is our ideal customer profile and go after that, because that is the lower hanging fruit, and it is a customer who actually has a problem and is looking to solve that problem. So in the tech industry, when we talk about customer profiles, we're really creating cards where we identify a user persona. Our user persona is simply just getting very specific about the individual and some of their demographic profiles, some of their geographic profiles, what kind of problem they may have, what they do for a living potentially. So really correlations so that we can segment these people into a smaller niche or into, again, a segment of the market. Now, the best approach here is usually simply to list out the 3 customer segments that you think might be interested in your product. So one of them might be work-at-home moms who are between 35 and 45 living in Chicago. Another segment might be retired senior citizens. And both of those profiles, as you can imagine, potentially could be a good fit for the product that you have in mind, but they probably have very different problems. Now, to give you a concrete example, I trained a founder whose name was Chris. He was running a company called Audio Cardio, and it's essentially an app where you can listen to music and you can improve your hearing just by listening to music. Now, at first, he was really targeting the demographic of DJs, people who were constantly listening to music. It was a really cool segment. And of course, they hear a lot of music and they get a lot of damage by having to edit music and having to play in big nightclubs. And another segment were senior citizens, who essentially were starting to develop hearing problems as they got older and older. So what I usually recommend is for you to do your best guess of 3 market segments who you believe could use the product or the idea that you have in mind. The next thing is going to be to select one of them who we believe is the most likely to have the hardest problem, or who's dealing with it more often, or who's more likely to want to purchase or engage with your product because they will see the largest outcomes from that. And so now for the customer segment that you have selected, you're gonna want to write a problem statement. And this is how you can structure it. So first we're going to talk about the situation or job to get done. And then we're gonna write is challenging for, and then we're gonna put the specific demographic that we've chosen. So senior citizens between 65 and 75 who are starting to lose their hearing in the case of the example I gave earlier on. And then we're gonna write because, and we're gonna write the specific challenges that that individual has. So let's use the example of Airbnb to create one of these problem statements. Some of you might actually not know that Airbnb started because during conference times, when there were big conventions happening, it was really difficult to find availability at hotels, and sometimes the availability was incredibly expensive. And so the founders of Airbnb chose to rent out air mattresses, hence the name Airbnb, to individuals looking to stay during that conference time at a reasonable price. So a problem statement early on for Airbnb might have sounded something like this. Booking hotel rooms during a massive convention is challenging for business travelers between 25 and 40 because there is a lack of availability and pricing is way too high. So basically, if you use that as an example and write out a problem statement, you're already gonna have a very clear idea of what problem you are trying to solve and also which individual is actually having it. And because there aren't answers in this room, we're gonna go out there and do customer discovery interviews to understand whether or not this is in fact true. We may actually find that individuals do not have this problem, or some of the challenges that we identified are not the real challenges that they're aware of and have. We might also realize that those specific problems that we thought they had it's actually for another customer segment. And so early on, we're gonna really try to get a feel by talking to individuals and seeing what they say around this idea. And so we're gonna go out there and we're gonna have conversations with individuals to understand where they have problems, to see whether or not they're in line with our assumptions. And this is a beautiful process called customer discovery. So the first thing you wanna do in customer discovery is to write a questionnaire, right? You wanna write between 5 and 10 questions that you're gonna be able to use to talk to the customer. Now, the biggest rule in customer discovery interviews is that they are not sales calls. You are not going to be talking about your product at all. As soon as you talk about your product or about your idea, people are gonna be like, oh yeah, that sounds great. People are gonna give you advice and tell you it's great, but that's useless for you at this point. You really wanna have feedback and understand in this situation, which one of these problems are they actually aware of? What problems are coming up when you don't talk about your solution? You just try to understand the situation and the way that they actually live their life. Now, the way that we wanna phrase all of these questions has to exclude could've, would've, the future. The best way to determine people's actions is by looking at their past actions, not at their future actions. So if we ask them something like, would you, this, that, the other, it's not gonna be very helpful because it's them pretty much making an assumption as well about what they would do in a specific given situation. And so we're really gonna wanna understand what they've done in the past in a certain situation, because that's more likely to tell us what they're likely to do in the future. So questions like, tell me about the last time you X. Right? And X is gonna be the situation that you're interested in providing a solution around, right? You're gonna ask them about their problem. Did you have any challenges in doing that? You're always gonna follow up with why, because each time they go a level deeper. And of course, you're gonna be talking about cats a lot of the times or just having a random conversation, but there's actually a lot of insight behind those interviews. And understanding your customer allows you to literally craft the entire rest of your business, from the product to the messaging to onboard them, tackling the objections that they have, even using the words that they use in terms of the problem when you communicate to them in your marketing messaging. So there's really a huge amount of value in doing these. Now, another rule is no ice cream questions. Now, an ice cream question is a question that is gonna be followed by yes, which means if I ask you, do you like ice cream? Most people are gonna answer yes. And if you answer no, you're probably a monster, but that's okay. Okay, I'm just kidding. If you don't like ice cream, that's fine. Another question I love asking is the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, how would you solve this problem? And let them really just imagine what it is, right? And what I like about this question is that people tell you what they actually want. In many cases, it's probably gonna be completely fictional and not possible, but at least you're gonna understand the problem they have, you're gonna understand what they want as a solution, and then you're gonna have to figure out which product can actually solve that problem, right? So it's a really interesting question to ask. And again, why? Always ask why, because they just go a couple levels deeper and it allows you to actually uncover insight that you might not if you just ask superficial questions. The next part is gonna be to actually book interviews with individuals within that segment. So we're really gonna want to, first of all, identify individuals who fall within the category that we consider to be the ideal customer profile, or that customer segment that we want to target first. So I personally love using LinkedIn to find these individuals, and it really just depends on how you're categorizing them. You could also find them in person. For example, if you are targeting yoga teachers, you might be able to actually go out to local yoga studios and have conversations with those individuals. So really, if we're doing it digitally, we want to create a list. And let's just remember, we're gonna do outreach to people who we don't know. Why? Because if you ask your mom or your friends, they're gonna tell you great things, but that's not really gonna help you get closer to the answers you need to build your business. So we're gonna create a list of about 50 individuals, and then we're gonna create a targeted message. In this message, we want to find a personal touch, because people are much more likely to answer our message if we show them that we've targeted them very personally. So you could find an article online they've written and refer to that in the first sentence of the message. You could go and find a YouTube interview of them and try to refer to that as the first sentence. You could literally go and find one of their posts on any social media and refer to that. Just show that you've taken the time to target them personally. No one wants to be targeted like people slam you on LinkedIn with all these automated messages trying to sell something right out of the gate, right after you've accepted their invitation. And then you're gonna do outreach with this message, both on LinkedIn, but also on Twitter direct messaging. Again, you can also go in person. You can also go to Quora. You could find groups on Facebook. There are loads of places where you could find individuals who have the specific interest that you're looking to target. Now, to hold these interviews, and when someone accepts to take a 15-minute conversation with you, you're essentially gonna ask these questions, and you wanna do it over the phone. You wanna do it over Zoom if possible, because you'll be able to see the change in their reactions or their excitement if you bring up certain things, or really their frustrations if they're talking about a problem and it seems like they're really living that problem. All these little things can give you a lot of tells. Now, another important thing is to take notes. Right? You're gonna wanna take very specific notes around your customer discovery interview. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna analyze those notes when we've interviewed 5 to 10 people. See if there's any correlations between the themes that they've brought up, if there's correlation between the problems that they've brought up. And we're really gonna use that as a way to identify, okay, it seems like there is a correlation between this customer group and this specific problem. As soon as we find both these things, we're already on the right track to be able to solve their problem, build a product that targets that problem. And again, there's gonna be many products you might be able to build that'll solve that individual thing. And we'll be talking about that in further modules as well. So just to recap, what's really important here is to identify a specific market segment or a niche in the market that you're gonna target that you believe has a very specific problem. And then we're gonna hold these customer discovery interviews to understand whether or not they know about their problem, they are aware of it, they need to solve it, they've tried potentially to solve it in the past, and that's gonna show you that there is a real market opportunity. That being said, we can't take their word for it, right? Because people say things, but then do they do the same thing, right? It's a very big difference between people say, I would love this specific thing, and then having them take out their credit card and pay for it. So that's where we go into the next modules, which is all around testing market demand, seeing if they're willing to take an action that proves that they want to buy or interact with your product. But a lot of the concepts that I've just talked about are just the first step of building out your startup. And you really need to understand all the other steps in the process from start to finish. There's a couple videos here that you can check out to be able to see what those are. I hope you're enjoying this content. Like, subscribe, see you in the next one. Take care.